Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give it one more minute for people to join, and then we're going to get started with our formal meeting. Thanks for being here. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. Welcome. My name is Michaela Grenier. I'm the Senior Planner for Public Engagement here at the Boston Region MPO, and I'm excited to welcome you all to our June Advisory Council meeting. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Gia, to introduce herself and take us through the role.
Thank you, Michaela, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gia Hong, and I'm a Public Engagement Coordinator at the Boston Region MPO. I will take us through some of our housekeeping slides. Next slide, please. First up, our notice of non-discrimination. You're invited to participate in our transportation planning process regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections at www.bostonmpo.org backslash MPO underscore non underscore discrimination. Next slide, please. For our accessibility statement, this meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact me, Gia Hong, MPO staff at jhung@ctps.org or at 857-702-3654 or using the chat box below. Next slide, please. For our meeting guidelines, all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. And to participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom, or using the reactions button in the toolbar. The facilitator will then call on participants. Please raise your hand via Zoom if you would like to use an AI note taker during this meeting. And if you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. Next slide, please. Awesome. Now I will take us through the roll call. First up, 495 Metro West Partnership.
Good afternoon, Jason Palage, present for the 495 Metro West Partnership.
Thank you. A Better City.
Hi, everyone. Scott Mullen and Amir Wilson here from A Better City.
Hello. Abundant Housing, Massachusetts.
Hi, this is Jesse Canson-Benenat from Abundant Housing. I'm here.
Hello. Thank you. Bike to the Sea. City of Chelsea.
Hello, Sarah Hahn, present.
Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation.
Hi, everybody. Jacinda Espenshade here from Codman Square NDC.
Conservation Law Foundation. Sorry, I do see.
Sorry about that. Seth Gadbois here for Conservation Law Foundation. I am standing in for Paulina Muratori today.
No worries. And hello. Livable Streets Alliance.
Hi, this is Maha from Liverpool Streets Alliance.
Good afternoon. Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative. Mass Bike.
Hello, this is Alexis from Mass Bike.
No. Mystic River Watershed Association,
Hi, Carl Alexander, present.
Mystic Valley Elder Services.
Hi there, Sheila Buckland, alternate Mystic Valley Elder Services here.
Hello. Prevention Research Center, Transportation for Massachusetts,
Wilson from T for Mass.
Town Green,
Good afternoon, Greg Fettisville from Town Green.
Town of Natick, Transit Matters,
Caitlin Allen Conley from Transit Matters here.
Watertown TMA,
Sophia Gallimore, Watertown TMA here.
That wraps up the roll call. Thank you. And I will pass it back to Michaela to take us through the rest.
Thank you, Gia. I'm now going to pass it over to Caitlin to deliver the chair's report.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a bit of a busy morning and last couple of weeks, so I have a very short report for you all. But just wanted to let you know that Carl and I continue to go to the MPO, all of the MPO meetings, and are present there and participating. We also meet regularly with Michaela and the rest of the MPO team to talk about how are things going in these meetings and what we can do to improve upon them and add value to what we're doing. And I'm excited to announce that the MPO tip for federal fiscal year 27 to federal fiscal year 31 was approved at the last MPO board meeting. And I'm excited to hear the presentation today about the long range transportation planning. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Michaela, and the rest of the team for sending out the background information early. I thought that was really helpful, and I hope others did as well. And looking forward to this meeting. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Caitlin. At this point, we're going to open it up for public comments. So if there are any members of the public who would like to make a comment, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. Okay, seeing and hearing none, we are going to move on to reviewing and approving the May meeting minutes. So at this point, I want to check in if there are any comments, questions, or corrections to the May meeting minutes. If anyone has any, please raise your hand, or your Zoom hand, I should say. Okay, seeing and hearing none, can we get a motion and a second to approve the May meeting minutes?
Motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Thank you. Can we get a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, then I'm going to pass it over to you, Gia, to take us through the roll.
That's good. Thank you. 495 Metro West Partnership,
Aye.
A Better City,
Aye.
Abundant Housing Massachusetts,
Aye.
Bike to the Sea,
Yes.
City of Chelsea,
Aye.
Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation,
Aye.
Conservation Law Foundation,
Abstain since I wasn't here.
Livable Streets Alliance,
Here, aye.
Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative,
Yes.
Mass Bike,
Yes.
Mystic River Watershed Association, Mystic Valley Elder Services,
Yes.
the Prevention Research Center, Transportation for Massachusetts.
Abstain because I wasn't here.
Town Green.
Yes.
Town of Natick. Transit Matters.
Abstain. I believe I was not here. Thank you.
Watertown TMA.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. I will pass it back to Michaela.
Thank you. All right, at this point in the meeting, I am excited to introduce a couple colleagues of mine who are going to be sharing with us about the long-range transportation planning. And so I'm about to turn it over to my colleagues, Erin McGuire and Marty Milkovitz, who are going to share a bit of framing context for then discussions we're going to have in small group breakout rooms. And so at this point, I would love to turn it over to you both, Erin and Marty, to introduce yourselves, and then Erin for you to provide some framing context on the long-range transportation plan and today's exercises.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michaela. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here today. My name is Erin McGuire. I am a transportation planner on staff to the Boston Region MPO. I am leading the development of the MPO's next long-range transportation plan. It's abbreviated as LRTP. Right now, we're expecting that to be endorsed during the summer of 2028. So that's about 2 years out. But we have some intense workshopping that we're going to be doing in the meantime. I'm here today with my colleague, Marty Milkovitz. If you want to come off mute real quick and introduce yourself, Marty.
Certainly, thanks. Hi, everyone. Marty Milkovitz. I'm the Director of Modeling here at the Boston MPO. So I oversee the team that's responsible for designing, developing, maintaining, and supporting the regional travel demand model that is used for many things, but primarily to develop projections for the long-range transportation plan. And we're looking forward to using it in a bit of a different way to support a scenario planning exercise that you're about to hear more about here. Thanks.
Great. If we could go on to the next slide, please. To just provide some high-level framing information to you all about what the long-range transportation plan is. It is one of the 3 core processes that the MPO is responsible for overseeing and developing. It fulfills a handful of different federal requirements, but most basically, the long-range plan establishes a vision, goals, and objectives for the Boston region's transportation system, looking out at least 20 years into the future. So right now, we're looking out to 2050. Some key elements of the plan include that vision, goals, and objectives framework that we then use to guide many of our planning activities. We produce an outline of our capital investment strategies, which are implemented through the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, which was just approved. And we also produce a fiscally constrained program of projects within our long-range plan that is included in the analysis of the cumulative impacts of the plan. Similar to what Marty had just said about our projections, it produces some numbers on air quality and equity metrics. Most of these projects, just as a note, are limited to projects that adjust capacity on the region's transportation network. On top of that, a lot of our planning activities are closely coordinated with many of our peer agencies who are doing some similar activities. Notable organizations to mention would be MassDOT, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and then the MBTA, of course. If we could go on to the next slide. To get some additional contextual information out of the way, I wanted to provide a grounding definition of what scenario planning is and what we're doing with it today in today's conversation. There's a variety of different approaches and definitions out there. When I'm thinking about this process, I always like to go back to the Federal Highway Administration's resources, particularly the ones that they've developed over the last decade. They define scenario planning as a strategic process to explore the impacts of future conditions, policies, and plans on the transportation system. It's important to note that each MPO approaches things slightly differently depending on the specific needs and circumstances of the region. We are going to be using a framework that is known as exploratory scenario planning that allows us to compare alternative futures against one another, and it creates a backdrop for us to deliberate policy trade-offs and identify strategies that would be beneficial in an array of different futures. If we could move on to the next slide. So as Marty had introduced earlier, the primary tool we are using for this process is our regional travel demand model. It was developed and calibrated for our most recent long-range plan, which is titled Destination 2050 in 2023. It models the average weekday trip demand and supply for the region. And not, as Marty had mentioned, the travel demand model is one of the tools we are using. There are many different tools that can be used to help support scenario planning, should some of the questions that come from this not necessarily be best suited for that specific model. For instance, if we want to look at destination access in more granularity, Conveyal might be a good tool for that. If we want to look at transit ridership, the Federal Transit Administration STOPS model would be a good tool, or even something as simple as some Excel spreadsheets can be a good reference material for the scenario planning exercise. The travel demand model is set up in two sort of key ways, those being demand and supply. What you're looking at right now is the sort of demand questions that can come up as we're looking at the travel demand model. This isn't necessarily a one-to-one on how the model is set up, but these are some good questions that can help us get into some of the information that can come out of this. For instance, we can get information on the demographics of people who are living in an area, get information on how many vehicles are within a household, how often each worker is going into the office to commute. See what else. When is this trip happening? Where are they going? What mode are they using to get there? And then most fundamentally, what route are they taking to do this? If we could go on to the next slide. The travel demand model can also help us answer some questions about supply. So we could think about where households, populations, and jobs are located throughout the region, looking at land use. We could think about the distance that someone has to travel by auto. We could think about distance by transit, and that also means what is the cost of transit. Thinking about what the active transportation network looks like and how that interacts and influences our mode choices. And then also, can you walk or bike somewhere? Is there transportation network company options available for some additional modes of transportation itself? If we could go on to the next slide. So our goal for today is to get you guys to engage in an interactive discussion, ultimately looking at some different future forces that we can expect to have an impact on the Boston region's transportation system. These could be items outside of the transportation system, putting pressures on it, or transportation itself having impacts into the future. After we have this list at the end of today's discussion, we are then going to take those forces, try to implement them into the travel demand model to the best of our abilities, and then we will come back to you with implications and results and have that true discussion we could pursue going forward. So if we could go on to the next slide. We have a couple of key discussion questions that we are hoping you will all engage with today. These are going to be what we're breaking out into groups to discuss. We will bring them in front of you then as well, so you don't need to remember them right this second. But as a preview, the main questions we're really interested in are, what driving forces do you think will have a significant impact on the transportation in our region over the next 20 years? On top of that, what are the biggest uncertainties that are facing the communities that you represent? And how might these uncertainties then impact transportation? And then finally, what are some tangible outcomes that you think will come from these different future forces that may happen? What should we have to respond to as an MPO and be cognizant of? If we could go on to the next slide.
Great. So
Gonna hand it to Michaela.
Sounds good. Thank you, Erin. All right. So at this point, I am here to give you a bit of logistical overview of what the breakout experience is going to be like and what's going to happen next. So in just a moment, I will be opening the breakout rooms. You'll see to Erin's point and to the discussion questions that were just shared, we have 3 different breakout rooms that are organized by category of different types of forces that could impact the transportation system and the sort of broader transportation landscape in the Boston region over the next 20 years. We're going to ask you all to self-select into those breakout rooms in just a minute. But before we do that, we want to let you know that we're going to be pausing the meeting recording during those breakout rooms. And we're going to have note takers in each of the breakout rooms who will make sure that the comments that are shared in those breakout rooms get captured for our minutes from this meeting. And so before we open those rooms, we want to just quickly again review those different themes. And we do ask that you opt into a room and stay in that room for the full duration of the breakout room experience, which is going to be about 35-ish minutes, give or take, depending on how long it takes everybody to get into those rooms. And you are welcome to, yes, so James, great question. James is asking if we can make comments on more than one topic. We know that all of these themes intersect with one another. So this is not meant to say that if, for example, you go to physical infrastructure, you can only make comments that specifically relate to that. But we're going to ask that you try to pick the room that fits most where you want to go deep in talking about, just so that we can have a deep conversation in the different forces that we're exploring. So I'll list those out again, and we'll leave this slide up as we have people get into breakout rooms. And then each of your rooms will have a facilitator and a note taker. And those facilitators will have the questions that Erin just shared, so you don't have to worry about trying to remember those as you're heading into breakout rooms. So with that being said, again, those groups are going to be, the first group is going to be physical infrastructure. So this is focused on things like sea level rise, state of good repair, the financial forces that relate to that physical infrastructure. Our second group is human health, so things related to uncertainties and driving forces around human health, including public health, safety, things like that. And then our third group is going to be technology and unforeseen forces. So that includes things like electric and autonomous vehicles, work from home, and so any sort of other things that we might not be able to anticipate or foresee at this moment, particularly in the realm of technology. Any other questions about those breakout rooms or about how this next 40-ish minutes are going to go? All right, then seeing and hearing none, we're going to begin to open those rooms. And if you have any problems getting into your room, you can feel free to private chat me and I'll help you get into that room. So at this point, I've opened all the rooms and we're going to go ahead and pause the recording and we'll resume it when we come back to the main room. All right, so I think we have everybody back. So welcome back from the breakout rooms. We are going to go ahead and get started back up with our slides and do a bit of a reflection and close out on this portion of the meeting as a full group. As a reminder, the notes from those breakout rooms will be shared with you all, and also because they will be folded into our meeting minutes, will be shared back with you all. But we're not going to do a formal report out in this space. Instead, I'm going to turn it over to Erin and Marty to field a bit of group discussion and reflection about that activity.
Thank you. If we could go on to the next slide, to sort of just guide and ground a reflection of sorts. We're curious if throughout that discussion, if there was any future driving forces that particularly struck your interest. Also, if you have any other general questions related to scenario planning, we're also happy to field those as well. Just hoping to have a quick reflection with you all.
I have a question. I guess like for the modeling, how will all these forces have the same weightage, or would some forces have more weightage than the other for the modeling, and how will you decide that?
So when you say weight, so you're kind of thinking about if we are running multiple variables in these different forces, and how will we sort of think about the distributions and the probabilities of events or the ranges?
Yeah, I guess that, and maybe another point of like, is there a variable that is more important than the other? And how do you decide that? Like, let's say cost of living versus housing versus there's like multiple factors, but is there one factor which is more important than the other two?
So the way I'm thinking about the approach with the modeling tools is we're going to use them to, I mean, first, take all the input we're getting from this workshop and the MPO board workshop. First, sort of see how can they be translated? Can they be translated to the model structure we have, right? So that'll be a subset for sure. But we work for that subset. Then I think a good approach is to actually look at them one at a time and test different maybe it's a different representation, right? A different set of assumptions and how they're related, and see how the model responds. And it may be the model doesn't respond at all because of the structure of the model, and maybe that doesn't respond at all because actually, our idea about how it's related doesn't really carry through, and that's information, right? And it's like, oh, we thought this was going to make a big change in this area, but it turns out that's actually not how we're seeing travel happen in that area, or there's some other limitation. That's like best case scenario because we've learned something by using the model. As far as interactions across multiple variables, again, as we start to overlay them, if we do the individual tests, we see reasonable responses, we put things together to see how they would either combine or compete. That again would tell us something and help us better understand how these forces are potentially influencing the metrics we care about, our goals, or the projects that we're going to see. So I don't think it's, as far as the choice of weighting, what's great about scenario planning is we're not trying to say what's likely to happen. We're not trying to say this is the future we're planning for. The plan requires us to. The LRTP, there's a single adopted future that will then be the one for evaluation that we have to do for our certification. But in scenario planning, we can do more of an exploration, right? And understand what is out there, what are threats, what are opportunities to kind of consider. Does that help answer the question? Great.
I want to just jump in here if possible. We were in group 3 on technology, and we were kind of giving closing thoughts, and I got cut off by the break room transition. But just in thinking about it, I ended up coming up with another kind of metric that I think I'd like to see reflected in the model. And that is, I guess, roadway or bicycle level of stress. And the share that I had was, this is just observation. I live in Brighton and I live on a side street. So one-way street, parking on both sides, rather narrow. And what I've noticed is that the traffic on that street is really high. And I was just looking at the map, and it's kind of a cut through from, Chestnut Hill to Soldiers Field Road, Star Drive, and the Mass Pike. And so I would like to imagine at one point, routing, you just stay on the main roads to get to those highways. But because traffic is kind of high these days, because you have double parking and deliveries and traffic is slow and you have bus routes, people will avoid that. And mainly because mapping services like Google Maps will kind of find a quicker way. And so that's kind of diverting traffic to this narrow one-way residential road. And, I ride my bike to work every day. And, it's another level of stress that I notice, kind of getting on my bike and taking off. And because it's a one-way, usually on one-ways, I'll ride the opposite way on my bike. And you can see in a lot of the municipalities in the inner core, and including Brookline, on low stress roads, when it's a one-way, there will be a counterflow lane for bicyclists, because really, there isn't a problem with bicyclists going that wrong way. We're kind of thinking more inclusively about transportation systems. But this also just made me think in general, one of the things that we like to focus on as bike advocates and thinking about that kind of infrastructure is, what is the level of stress on the roadways, and what is going to impact how people feel, safe, comfortable, or insecure, stressed on the road. And so if from the model we can identify, now in the future, where will the low and high stress roads be, that can help identify, okay, where should bike infrastructure be built? And where can we really lean in to make this a more viable mode for more people. So that's kind of a thought that kind of happened for me as we were kind of transitioning into the group coming together. And so I think as a driving force, just to stick to the prompts, which is an interesting one, it's just due to traffic, due to TNCs, deliveries, double parking, this kind of interesting curb management, stressing some of the roadways on the city's, major arterials, how, that is now something that is putting stress on the local neighborhood roads as well, because GPS is routing people different ways. So that's a long-winded thing, but I think there's a lot of good stuff in that comment.
Yeah, I'd love to just to kind of build on that. No, absolutely. And I think it's a really important thing to highlight how these metrics can be put into different contexts. And some of that will be, we can have a quantitative, from the estimates of the model. Some are going to be outside the scope of the model, but I think that these kinds of thoughts can help us take what could be, regional metric of miles of, trips made by bicycle, and then actually looking closer into areas where, like you're saying, there's a roadway stress caused by traffic or caused by delivery, or even just like the nature of the network is such that there's a lot of one-way or narrow roads, parking on both sides that may be further blocked. So it also leads me to thinking about, it's a challenge in identifying these two at what level of spatial granularity. It can be very specific to a segment, which is very important if you're thinking about a project on that segment. If we're talking about, region-wide forces, then it can get washed out by the entire, 97 cities and towns with quite a variety. So yeah, no, I like where you're going with that, and I appreciate the comment.
All right, if we could move on to the next slide, I think our agenda time is coming to a close. So before we leave today, we just wanted to give a quick recap of what some next steps you guys can expect from us are. So the first step is for us to take back these future forces that you have heard, that you've shared with us, the tangible outcomes that you're looking for. We're going to see how we can translate them into the travel demand model. After that, we're going to take those implications, bring them back to you and the MPO board, and walk you through some processes to identify different strategies that could help to drive mode shift throughout our region and help to ultimately achieve the vision that the Boston Region MPO has set out for our future in 2050. So some lofty goals. We have about 6 months to a year's worth of work for this project ahead of us. And again, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Erin and Marty. All right, at this point in the meeting, I'm going to introduce another colleague in just a moment because we're about to shift gears. We're going to stay in the theme of the long-range transportation plan, but we're going to sort of flash forward a little bit and talk about equity metrics that we use at a different part of the long-range transportation planning process. And so in just a moment, my colleague, Betsy Harvey-Hertzfeld, will be sharing a little bit about the equity metrics that we use in a couple of different ways. And this both uses the model that you were just hearing about, the travel demand model, and also is a part of long-range transportation planning, but in a different phase of the process and sort of in a different way than what we were just talking about, which is the scenario planning sort of driving forces work. So with that, Betsy, I will turn it over to you to introduce us to the equity metrics in the long-range plan.
Yeah, thanks, Michaela. And hi, everybody. I am Betsy Harvey-Hertzfeld. I manage the Community Transportation Access Program for the MPO, which generally covers the MPO civil rights and equity-related work. And that includes looking at the impacts of LRTP projects on equity populations. And that's what I'll be talking about for about the next 10 minutes. So prior to each LRTP, we update our metrics that we want to use in the LRTP to evaluate equity. So I'll talk through what some of those metrics are or were in the last LRTP back in 2023, And then at the end, I'll discuss ways in which you can provide some input into shaping the equity metrics for this upcoming LRTP. Next slide. So with equity metrics in the LRTP, we want to understand how projects that the MPO decides to include in the final recommended plan of the LRTP might affect equity populations. How might it improve travel times, or maybe how might it change air quality impacts? And so when I'm talking about equity populations, I'm referring specifically to the MPO 6 equity populations that are listed on the screen: people of color, people with low incomes, people with limited English proficiency, people with disabilities, older adults, and youth. And these populations have been selected and are involved in throughout our equity work and based on federal civil rights protections, as well as just the understanding of populations that have been historically underserved and overburdened by the transportation system in our region. So within that bucket of equity analyses, we have the disparate impact and disproportionate burden, or DIDB, analysis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that's something that's pretty core to the broader kind of equity discussion and analyses that we do. It is a federally required analysis that looks to see if people of color and low-income populations specifically would be disproportionately affected by projects in the LRTP. And while it's not our only equity analysis, as I said, it's really core to that work of understanding how the LRTP projects affect people. When we do the DIDB analysis for the final projects in the that are selected for the LRTP, which will take place in late 2027, early 28, we use our travel demand model for that analysis, which is, as Michaela alluded, it's a little bit different in the way that Aaron was talking about it for scenario planning, in that we use the model, in this case, what's kind of considered predictive modeling. We get one output, we get one answer for a metric we're trying to understand the impact of, so we can understand broadly how the LRTP projects are likely, or whether the LRTP projects would likely cause a disparate impact or a disproportionate burden on people of color or low-income populations. And so while we won't do the analysis for a little while, until around 2028, we want to start planning what metrics we're going to analyze now, so we have some time as staff to get input from the MPO and the Advisory Council and to develop those metrics, get the data we need, and develop that methodology that we need to do. Next slide. So a little bit of background on our DIDB analysis. We also have an accompanying policy that directs the MPO. The MPO approved in 2020 and updated in 2024 to direct how we apply and conduct each disparate impact analysis in the LRTP, and allows us to guide us in determining whether minority people of color or low-income populations would be disproportionately affected by projects in the LRTP, whether they would receive fewer benefits or be more harmed. And if there were, if that would be the case, then we would consider there to be a disparate impact. As a federally required analysis, it really does have a very specific focus. So the DIDB analysis focuses on one thing. We have other equity metrics that allow us to look at other kind of areas and understand other impacts. The DIDB analysis specifically requires us to assess impacts only on people of color and people with low incomes compared to white and wealthier population groups. And then secondly, and this is really kind of one of the core analytical kind of core differences and unique elements of the DIDB analysis, is that it only looks at future impacts of LRTP projects. It does not assess whether, the future impacts are an improvement, whether future impacts of the LRTP projects improve off of what is happening today, just how future impacts differ between different population groups. And so that's why we need those other equity metrics to better understand other perspectives and other ways that the transportation projects in the LRTP might affect people and might affect transportation for people in our region. And so while the DIDB analysis has kind of been emphasizing that it's a federally required analysis, and while it is, it's also a really important role and plays a really important role in helping the MPO better understand how projects could affect people and possibly make impacts worse for transportation on lower income folks and people of color. And ultimately, the goal is to help the MPO make more informed project program decisions, both in the LRTP and then finally in future TIPs when projects are actually programmed and funded. So it kind of helps us to better understand and make better planning decisions. Next slide. So in preparation for conducting all these equity analyses for the next plan, LRTP, we need to decide what metrics we're going to evaluate. And when I say metrics, what I mean here is what are the benefits that a transportation project may confer to people, or like improving travel times, or allowing people to reach more places than jobs than they used to be able to reach. But it can also mean what burdens are people experiencing? How might they be harmed, such as increasing congestion on a roadway or worsening air quality? So in the last LRTP in 2023, we looked at metrics within 3 different categories, which I have listed on the screen. Destination access, which looks at how many destinations like jobs or healthcare people can reach in a given travel time. We also looked at travel time, where we examined the average travel time for all trip types that it took people to get places. And then we also looked at air quality, where we looked at how exposed different populations are to different types of pollutants like carbon monoxide. So we'll be updating these metrics for the next LRTP, and we're seeking input from Advisory Council and from the MPO as to which metrics we should be including in the 2020 LRTP. We'll be sending out a survey next week, which will give you the opportunity to provide some feedback as to what metrics we should prioritize. Let us know if we're measuring the right things, are there things that we're missing. We'll send out the survey in the email that Michaela typically sends out about a week following this meeting as a follow-up item. So look for it there. And if you could respond, that would be really great. And really, that will really help shape how we measure equity in LRTP. And that wraps up my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions or comments at this time. And I hope that you'll take the opportunity to take the survey next week.
Thank you, Betsy. And if anybody has questions, we have a couple minutes for questions. You can raise your hand and Betsy will call on you if you have a question. Either I explained it really well or I explained it really terribly, but if it's the latter, please let me know. I'm happy to respond to any emails or calls or anything like that if you are interested in learning more one-on-one about this work. We'll have more opportunities for folks to provide feedback as we move forward with developing the plan and the equity metrics that are part of this. So hopefully you'll take the time to fill out the survey, and I'm sure I'll be back at a future meeting where we can continue to talk about this work. Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. All right, so at this point in our meeting, it is time for our members items. So does anybody have any events or projects or reminders that they want to share with the full group? If so, please raise your hand or share the reminder in the chat.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. I'll jump in real quick. I shared this with the breakout group, but we are continuing to run our guided ride series, which is helping people gain the knowledge and confidence to use the separated infrastructure that connects both with bike share and with the MBTA to sort of figure out a way to choose their own adventure for short trips, maybe part on the T and part on bike share with their own bike or whatever. GuidedRideSeries.com. I don't have access to the chat right now. I apologize. But we are running This Wednesday, I have a VIP ride. The link is not public, but you can hit me up and I'm happy to share it. And we're also running a ride this weekend with the Streetscape Curator. For those of you who know Matthew Dickey, we're doing a special ride with Matthew on Saturday with an architecture focus. So it's going to be fun. We're going to do these through the summer. Come on out, and thanks MassDOT for funding.
Awesome. Thank you, Better City team. Any other members' items? Yeah, Rhonda.
Take myself off mute. Can you hear me okay? Okay, now let me lower my hand. I'm new at all this good stuff. Hi, this is Rhonda from FHWA. I just wanted to tell you all, I know you were talking a lot about equity when it came to a lot of things. Just be mindful that, all the new executive orders that came out regarding equity. So sometimes when you write your stuff, kind of be heavy, be not so heavy on the word equity. Try to find alternative words for those words, like discrimination and stuff like that. Try to work around and try to find other type of words for that, because sometimes documents get kicked back if they see discrimination or people of color, things of that nature. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. We appreciate that. Any other members' items? Seeing and hearing none, we are going to begin to wrap up this meeting, and I'm going to share into the chat the survey that we use for advisory council members to share feedback on these meetings. So advisory council members, if you've got feedback on today's meeting, things that you're liking about these meetings, things you want us to change for the future, please share that feedback there. Also, you're always welcome to obviously reach out to us. Oh, yeah, I see a hand from Galen. Go ahead.
Sorry, Michaela, I meant to bring this up in What's Up with MassBike, but it took me a minute to get my hand up. Not to keep us from adjourning, but I wanted to invite everybody to an event that's going to take place on June 19th, which is Juneteenth. So hopefully you all have the holiday for those who can take it. But MassBike is hosting the Kitty Knox ride, which honors a historical figure who was in the greater Boston cycling scene back in the 1890s. And the ride is going to be great. It's a collaboration with Mount Auburn Cemetery. We're going to visit a bunch of grave sites from folks from the Riverside Cycling Club, which is from also the area. We're going to head out to the Charles River Museum of Industry and see the first permanent exhibit in a museum for Kitty Knox. And it's going to be a great day. So if folks are having the opportunity to take the afternoon, I would highly recommend you come on over to Mount Auburn Cemetery and bring your bike or walk and come hang out with MassBike and celebrate Kitty Knox.
Awesome. Thank you, Galen. All right, I think that was our last member item, but if anyone else has any others that they've been waiting on, please feel free to share those. Otherwise, can I get a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Greg.
Second.
Thank you. Oops. I think we had a second from our Better City team. Is that correct? Okay. All right, well then that officially wraps up our June meeting. Thank you all so much for your time. We appreciate you all being here.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.